Hey, what's going on, guys? Mariana5 here for Raise Your Edge, and I'm here with Fallout86, and we have a hand that he played recently at the 2-5 No Limit Euro Cash Games, so let's just get right into it here. He's got queens in the hijack here, middle position opens, obviously first decision here. What do you think? Pretty obvious 3-bet. I guess we don't have to go too far into this.
Yeah, definitely standard 3-bet with queens.
Yeah, and then button cold calls, so I mean, did you have a read on the button?
Yeah, button was a bit of a station. We don't have a stack size, but he had us covered, so we played in a really deep game, actually.
Yeah.
It was pretty late. And yeah, as you can see, Bedrock also cold calls our 3-bet. And I mean, even when this happens, you see, okay, we are definitely playing in a good game when two people cold call your 3-bet.
Yeah, for sure. So you're thinking button can have decently wide range, like suited broadways, pairs, and then big blinds probably got a lot of like mid pairs, right? Good suited broadways as well.
Yeah, exactly, something like this. I think button was really a station, so he can have a lot of serial connectors, serial gappers, pairs, serial broadways.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Bedrock is a regular, so he is definitely a bit more cautious. So probably like some stronger pairs, like I don't know, 6s, 7s plus, ace king, ace queen suited, something like this. You never know. Sometimes they also show up with king queen suited, jack 10 suited, which they are not supposed to. I mean, you're not supposed to call nearly any hands against the 3-bet in the big blind, but they still do it a lot. So yeah, I think this range should be realistic.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. That's something you definitely want to avoid in games, especially if you're playing against competent players. You just don't really want to be cold calling 3-bets. There's obviously some spots, maybe you're in position and there's a massive whale in there, and you're just getting the right price with like pairs, but in a spot like this where you're out of position, because from your point of view, like you can narrow his range pretty well, and it's just, I don't know, it's just going to be really hard to play, right? You're just capped. I'd better just be using mainly a 4-bet or fold strategy.
Yeah, it's way easier. I mean, especially also with a weaker opponent in the big blind, we definitely want to isolate the fun player when we are sitting in the big blind. It's also way easier to play, and you're not also in those tricky 300, 400 or 400 situations where you're out of position in a 3-bet pot with no initiative. It's so hard to play and show up with a profit in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. So flop, decent. I mean, not the best flop, but obviously pretty dry. I wouldn't assume either of them really have 3s or 4s. Maybe the button, I think, but you're pretty much only worried at this point about 10s. I think possibly kings could be out there. People definitely slow play those type of hands in these games, but I wouldn't be too worried about this flop. So
yeah, I definitely like it. That's for sure.
Yeah. So what do you think? First decision here, post flop.
Yeah, I think it's important here to realize that you should not bet all your strong hands all the time. Otherwise, you're always check folding. Of course, we want to adapt. So here, as I told you, button was a weaker player. He is a calling station, so I want to put most of my hands into my betting range because he was passive and not an active player. So I want to mainly value bet, but against a competent button, I would also put a lot of middling type hands like aces, kings with no club into my check calling range. Here against weaker opponents, I definitely want to value bet more hands and extract value. But this is important that you can also check call down with some hands. Otherwise, you're so capped. Because I think when you don't check call like aces, kings on spot texture, you're never check calling a strong hand, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
And the question is also, how big should we size? What do you think on the spot texture, or how big would you size here with queens in a 3-bet pot? Pretty deep.
I think. I think this board texture calls for bigger bets overall in 3-bet pots, and I think a hand like queens and jacks, I would definitely be more interested in betting than a hand like aces or kings, just because they need less protection. So I don't mind betting. I don't mind checking as well at some frequency. But again, as you say, the button is a bit of a fun player. But we're definitely not looking to play like huge pots in these spots. But yeah, I think betting between 40 to 60 or 70% is fine. I think a small bet can work too, but I think you can use multiple sizings. But obviously, when we bet here, our range is going to be pretty tight, so I don't mind using a bit of a bigger sizing here, because we're not just going to bet all of like whatever. If we have like ace jack of hearts, like all those hands, we're just not betting, right? So we're pretty careful with our range. We're going to bet some good club draws and then some of our good pairs. So yeah, I think using a bigger sizing is fine, even if it's multi-way here.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's it. We have some nut gut shots like ace 5 and stuff, but that's really about it.
Yeah, and so button calls and big blind calls. So yeah, pretty interesting. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be too worried. I expect them to be, if they did have pocket tens, at least considering raising.
Yeah,
But yeah,
especially the big blind.
yeah, especially if you're out of position. So interesting spot. It had
Yeah,
spades on
pretty
the
much a
turn.
brick.
Yeah, shouldn't really change too much. But now the big blind comes out betting pretty big too. What was that? Pretty much, yeah, near pot, which is obviously in this game is a pretty big bet too, right?
Yeah, for a 2-5 game, when someone goes ahead and just bets 100 big blinds on the turn, which is nearly pot size, this is a substantial bet. So yeah, I went into the tank and thought about his range. So yeah, when we think what is he representing, yeah, not a large range, right? He's repping tens and pocket eights, maybe like aces or kings as a value range, but basically that's about it. Because I think when he's a bad rack, he's good enough to realize that he cannot pot bet jacks on the turn and show profit, or a hand like ace 10 suited. So yeah, I think his range is pretty narrow. And the other problem I had is when he has a strong flush draw and he wants to go with his flush draw. He has, for example, like ace jack of clubs, and he really wants to go with his hand. He will always check raise flop. He will not wait for a brick on the turn and then start betting pot. This makes absolutely no sense, and you never see that. Or can we add other hands to his range? What do you think?
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I think I definitely agree with the flush draws. I think the thing is too, if he has a flush draw that he played this way, I think a lot of times he's just going to, shove the river, which even though you shouldn't really, right? If you had a hand like, let's say, ace, queen of clubs, it's not really a good hand to be betting turn and shoving river with because you're blocking a decent portion of your opponent's folding range. So at least optimally, you're not meant to be shoving it. But I think a lot of players don't give a shit about that, and they're still going to shove it, right? So if you call turn here, you're going to basically have to be prepared to call some rivers. Otherwise, your turn call doesn't make too much sense because I don't think he's taking a hand like jacks, like you said, and betting turn and then giving up river, right? Like if he's betting here and going with his hand, I feel like he's probably going to, follow through with the bluff, or if he's got value, he's going to shove, right? So I think this is definitely the point of the hand where you're making the biggest decision. And it's just, you have a player behind you as well who you never know. I mean, he could have some random hands that he ends up shoving or calling. So I think it's going to be a really tough spot. It's going to be really tough to play most rivers. And yeah, I think as you said, it's really tough to put him on any value that you beat. If he was a fish, if he was like a whale, I would definitely consider giving him jacks. Maybe some hands like ace 10, right? In that spot, it becomes a lot easier. But when he's a reg, even if he's a bad reg, like, as you said, he's competent enough to know that you still have an uncapped range. And it's just not a spot I expect people to be like, against two players trying to take the pot away. So I don't know. It's interesting because, again, at the same time, his value range is so narrow, right? He's basically repping eights. Yeah. Like, he could have tens. Tens would make sense, but I'd basically say he's got tens or eights. And he could occasionally have, like, kings or aces as slow plays. You do see that sometimes. But, yeah, I think
it's rarely, like, one or two combinations we can give him.
Yeah, so it's definitely a gross spot. And, I mean, we're not super high up in our range. We still do have hands like aces and kings. Maybe a hand like ace king of clubs, ace queen of clubs, I think would almost be a better call because in that case, at least when we're behind, we're drawing to way more outs. And then, yeah, occasionally something like the ace could be good, right? If he has a hand like pocket kings, or maybe we're chopping with queens. So I think it's a fine spot just to go ahead and fold.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough situation, tough decision. And also, I think what's important here is we are three-handed on the turn, so his lead is even stronger. So I think he definitely realized that the button is a weaker opponent, and he is also realizing that the button is probably not folding 10x on the turn. So I think this will also decrease his bluffing range tremendously.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point. Yeah, I mean, these spots they're just tough to play because, I mean, in a 3-bet pot, two guys cold call you in a 3-bet pot already technically ranges should be really narrow, right? I mean, the button can be wider, but the big blind isn't going to have a narrow range. So you really, when you get in these dicey spots, it's not the time to be like, I don't know, at least in my opinion, it's not the time to be taking really marginal spots and piling a bunch of money in because a lot of times you're just going to run with the nuts. Just because players are pretty damn cautious in these spots. So I think folding what you did is a good play here. I mean, it's close, but as we say, it's just one of those spots where whatever. I mean, he's repping a narrow range, but it's like I'm not prepared to put in whatever, like 400 big blinds here with one pair in the spot. So I like the fold.
Yeah, thanks. I think here it's really important to try to break down villain's range as good as you can. Also depends on your game, about your opponents. And yeah, we definitely want to play exploitive in those situations.
Yeah.
And when you can find any bluffs in your opponent's range, well, then you could, or you should fold a large portion from your range. This is how it is. And as you see, this is a really large bet in this game. And if we call turn, we are definitely always playing for the remaining 400 big blinds. And of course, those spots will affect your overall win rate. When you make good laydowns, good calls, this will show in the long run. So yeah, make sure to always take your time in those situations, because most people are not taking their time. They're making really quick decisions in 2, 3, 4 seconds. And yeah, they're losing fairly often a bunch of money. So make sure to at least try to break down villain's range as good as you can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting spot. And button calls. I mean, I think another just last point is that if you are worried about defense frequencies, because obviously you don't want to be folding your entire range, right? I mean, there's some spots to call for, but it's like here, at least you still do have tens, that's 3 combos. You could say like, okay, maybe I'll call with tens and maybe a hand like ace, king of clubs, and then maybe like aces and kings. It's say aces without a club, like something like that, right? Like you can still design a range where you're not like massively overfolding. Like obviously in the spot, it can feel like queens might be overfolding, but if you're worried about that, just always remember that you still have at least some. And as you just said, it's like a lot of times it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what's optimal. You can basically fold nearly your entire range in a lot of spots in these live games, especially because players they're not constructing their range where they're like, they have decent amount of bluffs, especially in a multi-way pot. So don't get caught up in that thinking. That's my opinion. And just look to make those laydowns. So yeah. He calls. At least you got to see a showdown, and he had the pocket eights, so I don't know. Definitely interesting, right?
Made a good fold. And button called with jacks, so it was a massive pot. And of course, as a weaker opponent, it's way harder to get away from overpairs. So he called down with jacks, and we had only the second best hand, so we made a good laydown.
Yeah, that's
on the turn.
Really interesting. Pocket eights. I mean, super narrow range. It's a 6 spot. He's basically that's what he's repping, right? It's like pocket eights. But it's just, what else is he going to do that with, right? I just don't see it. I don't.
That's the problem. Sometimes the value range is really small, but you can not find a single bluff. And when this is the case, most of the time, people will always have those value hands, always like pocket tens, pocket eights. But when you think he's not leading with weaker hands, like top pair type hands or draws, then you should make this laydown.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a good general rule in poker always is that if you're looking to bluff catch, basically if your opponent can have bluffs and you can beat some of his value, then you should be calling almost always, right? But if he can have, if he can have some bluffs and then you don't beat any of his value, then it definitely becomes closer, right? And then if it's a spot where you think he has limited bluffs and on top of that you don't beat that much value, those are the spots that you definitely just want to, deviate and just make some big folds. So good hand, I think, and interesting spot.
Yeah, for sure. So stay tuned for more. And this was for the A6 and Mario 5. Take care, guys.
Later, guys.